Hey guys, what's going on? Blaine back for another Hulu review, and today I'm going to be talking about The Princess. The Princess is an American fantasy action movie that tells the story of its titular protagonist, who's kidnapped and locked away in a room inside her castle after refusing to marry an evil man. He proceeds to take over the castle, but the princess wakes up and begins plotting a way to escape. Following this, she has to make her way through several obstacles and fight her way through hordes of enemies. With her potential husband seeking to take over the family throne, the princess has to work fast to protect her family from harm's way and save the kingdom in the process. This turned out to be a fairly predictable and generic action flick, though that's not entirely a bad thing. It manages to be a fun time with its numerous action scenes and cheesy presentation, though these same things also become excessive to a point where it starts to hamper its enjoyability. Joey King does a great job in the role of the princess, who's not known by any other name in the movie. Her character isn't exactly unique, but it's impressive to see how much Joey commits to the action scenes. It's not always obvious to tell when a stunt double fills in for her, so the fact that she went the extra mile for these scenes makes her more believable in the role. As far as her personality is concerned, it's also nice to see her show some vulnerability as opposed to consistently being a badass. Even though she doesn't mess around when the moment calls for it, she also suffers when bad things happen to her loved ones, and this helped me sympathize with her more as a result. Most of the other characters aren't really worth mentioning except for the villains Julius and Moira. They're fun to a point as cheesy flamboyant bad guys, but they exaggerate the delivery of their lines to a point where they almost become a parody, which wouldn't be so bad if the movie was more consistent with its tone. The tonal shifts were something that became more of an issue for me over time. It's clearly trying to have fun with its medieval setting, action scenes, and funny lines, but it also randomly becomes overly serious at times with how often the princess reminisces about past events with tears in her eyes, or how dramatic some action scenes will become. For the kind of movie it's trying to be, it's a bit much. The action scenes are ultimately the movie's biggest saving grace, and it is absolutely loaded with them. It feels like every 2 or 3 minutes after one action scene finishes, another one pops up to take its place, and sometimes there's no break in between. It assaults the audience's senses with so much relentless violence it can be overwhelming, though I can't deny that it's pretty entertaining too. The biggest thing that makes them so fun to watch is how violent they are. They never reach slasher levels of violence, but it makes good use of its R rating, allowing the filmmakers to get creative with how the princess inflicts pain on her enemies, and it's a joy to see all the stunt work and props used to make these scenes happen. As crazy as the action can be at times, I actually like how it progressed from the princess trying to be stealthy before eventually being forced to go all out. It goes from a few tense encounters to whole gauntlets where the princess is surrounded by goons and has to take down one bad guy after another, and it's a blast to see her improvise her way out of hairy situations. There are some things that bog the action scenes down a bit though, the biggest of which is that there are way too many of them. I really wasn't joking when I said that there's always an action scene every couple of minutes. As fun as the action can be, there's only so many times I could deal with the princess swinging her sword at somebody before it started getting old. With how many of these scenes there are in this movie, it also becomes easier to see little mistakes that pop up during them. Extras will fumble in the background, melee attacks don't land despite sound effects indicating otherwise, and it generally becomes more difficult to tell what's going on with the story with so much chaos happening on screen. I've seen some complaints online about the movie being unrealistic, with how a woman is able to take on so many men at once. For me, that's not so much of an issue as much as it is when she's cornered on all sides in a place she can't get out of. Man or woman, any character in that situation would easily be taken out, yet for some reason the knights just stand around flailing their swords and wait for her next move, which took me out of the experience. I also think it's a little funny with how Julius and even the other goons state out loud that they want her alive, yet they're clearly trying to kill or at least harm her based on all the action scenes in the movie. This didn't hurt the action for me as much as the other things did, but I still found it a bit odd. Once the princess's friend Lynn is introduced, that's when the action starts to pick up again. Throwing a second character into the mix helps add to the already massive variety of action scenes, especially when the two work together to pull off some punishing moves. It almost feels like someone dropping into a video game as player 2, and definitely increased my enjoyment of it all. Flashback scenes provide backstory for the characters, one of which explains why the princess is so proficient in combat, so it's nice that there's a basic explanation for that. They can occasionally be distracting during the quieter moments of the story, but in general they were a welcome break from the constant carnage that the princess dishes out on everyone. I'm not a huge fan of fantasy movies, but I did like the medieval themed setting the movie uses. The art design, props, and costumes all looked appealing and faithful in how they're portrayed, and the character accents, despite some actors slipping with them a bit, were enjoyable in a tacky kind of way. This being said, I felt like the movie didn't take as much advantage of this setting as it could have. It's mostly set in one location, and apart from the elaborate sets and different kinds of knights, there's no attempt to flesh out the characters or the world that they live in. It all plays out like another typical damsel in distress fairy tale, except with the princess being the hero and her having to go down a tower instead of all the way up. It's nice to have some sense of familiarity behind it, but it's a shame that it offers so little in the way of novelty to make it stand out more. Overall, The Princess is a mundane action-adventure flick that does a decent job at getting one's adrenaline pumping, but starts to wear thin after a while. If you like action movies that take place in fantasy settings and you don't want to think too hard about the story, this movie would definitely be up your alley. It lacks creativity with its plot, and the amount of action on screen can be mind-numbing at times, but Joey King's performance and some highlights in the action do make it worth watching to some extent. What did you think about this movie? Did you like how much action was featured in it, or did you think that there was too much of it? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways guys, that's going to wrap up my review of The Princess. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review the American romantic drama Hello, Goodbye, and Everything in Between. Bye bye!